Story 1. In the late 1980s, my father was an avid outdoorsman who frequently embarked on week-long treks in the Colorado Rockies with his friends. During one summer excursion in Pike National Forest, they set up camp in what they believed to be a safe ravine. Late that night, my father unzipped the tent to relieve himself and was startled by the sight of a pair of pale, bare feet standing just outside. Alarmed, he quickly zipped up the tent and woke his companions. They ventured out, flashlights in hand, calling out to whoever might be there. My father insisted on what he'd seen, describing the feet in detail, old and blotchy, with a distinctive lump on the right ankle. His friend Tony, upon hearing this description, urgently insisted they move camp immediately. Without explanation, they hastily packed up and relocated to higher ground atop a nearby hill. The following morning revealed the gravity of their decision. A flash flood had torn through the ravine overnight, which would have surely been fatal had they remained. It wasn't until later that Tony shared the significance of my father's vision. His grandfather, who had passed away just a month prior, had promised to always watch over him. The feet my father described bore an uncanny resemblance to those of Tony's late grandfather. My father, a deeply religious man, believes to this day that whether supernatural or not, some form of divine intervention saved their lives that night. Story 2. During my mother's final days, I stayed by her side in our living room, where we had set up a hospital bed. On night duty, I witnessed something extraordinary. My mother would occasionally wake, laughing and carrying on full conversations with an unseen presence. One night, she exclaimed between fits of laughter, "Pick up my brother's playing cards. He keeps throwing them on the floor." Her brother, who had been her closest friend, had passed away 15 years earlier from a sudden heart attack while coaching a baseball game. The loss had been so traumatic that she rarely spoke of him afterward. Hearing her talk to him as if he were present caught me completely off guard. 6 months after my mother's passing, I found myself alone in that same living room. While on a FaceTime call with my 9-year-old nephew, he suddenly grew quiet and looked confused. "Who's that man?" he asked. Puzzled, I reminded him that I was alone in the house. Suddenly gripped by fear, I asked him to describe what he saw. "The man in baseball clothes," he replied. "He keeps walking back and forth behind you." A few days later, I asked my nephew for more details about the man he had seen. His description matched my late uncle perfectly: black hair, mustache, and baseball attire. This experience solidified my belief in an afterlife and the presence of guardian angels among us. Story 3. During a camping trip in the mountains of Maui with a couple of friends, we encountered what locals call the Night Marchers, the spirits of ancient Hawaiian warriors said to march to sacred sites or battlegrounds. Legend has it that making eye contact with these spirits can be fatal, potentially resulting in one's own spirit being taken. On our second night, exhausted from a long day of hiking, we were preparing for an early night when we heard distant drumming. The sound gradually intensified over about 10 minutes. One of my friends, a half-Hawaiian who grew up in the area, became visibly panicked. He urgently instructed us to retreat to our tents and lie face down until the drumming ceased. Inside our tents, we lay motionless as the drums grew louder. Soon we could discern the sounds of marching, the clacking of wood, footsteps, and other indescribable noises. At the crescendo of this otherworldly procession, a pungent odor like burnt roadkill permeated the air. After what felt like an eternity, the smell dissipated, and the sounds receded into the distance. We remained still until we were certain the phenomenon had passed. Too unnerved to sleep, we decided to break camp and leave at first light. This experience, which occurred about 2 years ago, has had a lasting impact. While we still go camping, we now avoid that particular area and generally stay closer to more populated regions. Story 4. About a year ago, during a child's birthday party at a local park, a group of us decided to hike into the nearby woods to revisit a fort we had built as children. The wooded area, while substantial, was surrounded by highways and roads. As we ventured deeper into the forest, my friend suddenly halted, pointing ahead. "Do you see that?" he gasped. "That lady floating?" From our vantage point, we all witnessed what appeared to be a woman levitating above the ground. As we cautiously approached, the horrifying reality became clear. A woman had hanged herself from a tree, and judging by her appearance, it had happened very recently. Shaken, we called the police, who later found her car parked on the opposite side of the park with the door still open. They determined she had taken her life that very day, possibly just hours before our tragic discovery. Despite having witnessed many disturbing things in my life, this encounter continues to haunt me. The memory still sends chills down my spine. Story 5. During a weekend camping trip with my best friend and her father when we were about 15, we experienced something truly unnerving. On our final night, I awoke in the early hours, probably around 3 a.m., to the sound of footsteps. The soft, crunching rustle of pine needles suggested the gait of a large person approaching our tent. The footsteps came directly to our tent and then abruptly stopped. I couldn't discern any shadow or silhouette, though I wasn't sure if it was due to the angle of the moonlight. Paralyzed with fear, I was certain I was about to die. Glancing at my best friend, I realized she was awake too, her wide eyes mirroring my terror. We never heard the footsteps retreat. We lay awake, listening intently until sunrise, but there was no sound of departure, no shadow seen. When we finally heard her father stirring and lighting the campfire, we bolted from the tent, screaming and crying. Later, we compared our experiences, confirming that we had both heard and sensed the same thing. Her father thoroughly searched the campsite but found nothing out of place. The most chilling aspect was the thought that something might have stood just outside our tent, observing us. It felt as though whatever it was knew that we were aware of its presence. Story 6. While living in Brazil, a friend and I embarked on an overnight hiking trip through the mountainous rainforest in one of the southern states. Our primary goal was to test our gear before a longer expedition in Patagonia. The journey began arduously, with constant uphill climbing in oppressive heat and humidity. By early evening, drenched in sweat and rain, we found a rare flat spot to make camp. Exhausted, I retreated to my tent to read. Around 3 a.m., I was awakened by the distant sound of a girl singing. The voice drew nearer until it seemed to pass right by our tents before fading into the distance. The song, possibly a lullaby about rain, was in Portuguese but sounded oddly distorted. An hour later, the singing returned, this time with a hint of exasperation in the girl's voice as she passed by again, heading back toward the trailhead. Another hour passed, and once more, the singing approached. This time, however, the girl's voice was interspersed with crying. She passed by our tents for the final time, her sobs mingling with the haunting melody. When morning came, my friend and I exchanged bewildered looks and muttered, "What the hell was that?" before packing up and continuing our hike. The experience left us deeply unsettled, especially given our remote location on a trail rarely used by anyone other than occasional recreational hikers. To this day, I have no explanation for the mysterious singing girl who haunted our campsite that night. Story 7. During a summer job in the Idaho backcountry, I found myself in a peculiar and chilling situation. My co-worker and I were stationed in a wall tent, 20 miles from the nearest human and 60 miles from any town, tasked with vegetation work and weed spraying. Our only connection to previous workers was through their journal entries, which we used to track past herbicide applications. One particular journal, belonging to a worker named Andrew, caught my attention. It detailed an unsettling encounter during his solo stint after his partner, Amy, had left early due to illness. Andrew wrote about meeting a disheveled hiker named Ray, who claimed to be part of a group but carried no backpack. Despite the oddity, Andrew didn't think much of it, assuming Ray might be from a nearby hunting camp. The following evening, Andrew returned to camp to find Ray had made himself at home, starting a fire, but remaining eerily silent. Unable to contact the Forest Service due to the late hour, Andrew offered Ray food and a place to sleep in Amy's vacant cot. In the middle of the night, Andrew was jolted awake by Ray's blood-curdling screams. He found Ray naked on the cot, seemingly trapped in a hysterical night terror, describing him as looking like a ghost. By morning, Ray had vanished. Hours later, a helicopter landed nearby, disgorging police officers and search dogs. It was then revealed that Ray was an escaped convict from Idaho State Prison who had been wandering the wilderness for a week in an attempt to reach Montana. I later learned that this forest corridor was a known escape route for prisoners, many of whom were violent offenders with mental health issues. Reading Andrew's matter-of-fact account of this harrowing experience, while sitting in the very same tent, deep in the wilderness, left me on edge for days afterward. Story 8. While I haven't experienced these personally, I've heard numerous accounts of strange occurrences on the island of Kauai. One prevalent legend involves the night marchers, spectral processions of ancient Hawaiian warriors. Witnesses report hearing distant horns or seeing torches moving through the night. Tradition dictates that upon encountering the night marchers, one must lie face down and avoid looking at them, as making eye contact is believed to be fatal. Some say that those with Hawaiian ancestry are more likely to survive such an encounter, as they may have ancestors among the marchers. Local lore suggests that to ensure survival, one should remove their clothes, urinate on themselves, though this is controversial, and lie face down. Another supernatural entity in Hawaiian folklore is the menehune, mischievous forest dwellers often blamed for unexplained phenomena. My great-grandfather allegedly had a menehune problem that resulted in small, muddy footprints appearing on his walls and ceilings. Frustrated by the mess, he resorted to firing his shotgun into the air and shouting to scare them off. While these stories may sound far-fetched, they're deeply ingrained in local culture. Such experiences are said to occur frequently in the wild, with night marcher encounters being particularly common in certain areas. Story 9. During a nighttime land navigation exercise as part of my military training, I had an unnerving encounter with a fugitive. As we headed to the training area, we passed numerous law enforcement vehicles. At the staging area, radio reports confirmed an ongoing manhunt for a suspect who had fled across multiple states and was believed to be in the nearby woods. Despite the police presence a few miles away, we proceeded with our exercise. After completing the daytime portion, I returned to the woods to await nightfall for the next phase. In this stage of training, instructors often intervene to simulate combat scenarios, so I was prepared for potential disruptions. As I approached my final navigation point, I noticed movement in a nearby field. Assuming it was an instructor attempting to ambush me, I decided to preempt their attack. Armed with a rubber training rifle, I leaped out shouting, "Marines, motherfucker! Bang, bang, bang!" as per our training protocol. To my shock, the figure responded with a panicked, "Oh fuck!" and fled. Realizing this wasn't an instructor, I quickly found cover and waited, heart pounding, for about 45 minutes before making a dash to complete my course. Back at the staging area, I reported the incident to my instructors, who immediately called off the exercise. The following morning, news broke that authorities had apprehended the fugitive roughly 2 miles from where I had encountered him. This experience served as a stark reminder that even in controlled training environments, real-world dangers can unexpectedly intersect with military exercises. Story 10. During a college break, while visiting my mother in Florida, I found myself on an ill-fated canoeing expedition. My mother, her new boyfriend, and I decided to rent a canoe at a nearby state park. Despite my outdoor experience and my mother's country club background, we were woefully unprepared for what lay ahead. My mother's boyfriend, a man whose weight equaled that of my mother and me combined, possessed a dangerous mix of enthusiasm and incompetence. As we set out on the alligator-infested river, a common feature of rural Florida waterways, he insisted on providing the motive power while I steered. His erratic movements made it nearly impossible to maintain course. He shifted his weight unpredictably, repeatedly, almost capsizing us. Even after I spotted an alligator surfacing nearby, he remained oblivious to the potential danger. Although alligators generally don't view adult humans as prey, I was acutely aware that ending up in the murky water could prove disastrous. Adding to the tension, the boyfriend would occasionally shout crude racial slurs, seemingly for no reason. Throughout this ordeal, my mother remained oddly detached, smiling and identifying migratory birds as if we were on a peaceful nature tour. Frustrated and anxious, I made the decision to cut our trip short, despite protests about getting our money's worth from the canoe rental. As we circled near the boathouse in the final minutes of our rental, the boyfriend let out one last racial slur, providing a disturbing punctuation to our harrowing adventure. While this wasn't a ghostly encounter, it certainly qualified as one of the most unsettling outdoor experiences I've ever had. Horror Story 11. About 15 years ago, My friend and I impulsively decided to go on an overnight backpacking trip near Holy Jim Canyon in Orange County, California. We parked in a random spot and hiked into the wilderness without following any established trails. After about 2 hours of hiking, we found ourselves in a secluded area and set up camp next to a small creek. With a couple of hours of daylight left, we relaxed by the water. My friend, in a moment of random humor, jokingly said to his dog Merlin, "See, Merlin, this is where we worship Satan." Incredibly, within seconds of this statement, we heard someone approaching through the undergrowth. A man emerged, accompanied by an enormous wolf-like dog. The stranger was shirtless, incredibly muscular, wearing red shorts and covered in flame tattoos across his chest. He casually complimented our campsite and asked if we planned to spend the night. When we confirmed that we were, he simply replied, "Cool, see you later," and walked away. Left in stunned silence, we tried to process what had just happened. We were miles from anywhere, yet moments after a joking reference to Satan, this bizarre figure appeared. He carried no supplies, had no water, and was accompanied by an unleashed, collarless beast of a dog. His appearance, muscular build, red clothing, flame tattoos, seemed almost too on the nose given the context of my friend's comment. The brief, odd conversation and his ominous "see you later" sent chills down our spines. We quickly packed up our belongings and hightailed it back to our car before sunset, thoroughly unsettled by the encounter. To this day, I'm at a loss to explain what we experienced in those woods. Story 12. This took place in southeast Kentucky at a popular lake outside of Erie, in between two small towns. Myself, two other guys, and the girlfriend of one of the guys decided late one summer evening, around 4 or 5, to go camp out there. So we packed up quickly, got some snacks and water, and headed out to a spot we were familiar with. It was actually really cool because this lake has a big dam that one side drops way down about half a mile to a treatment center to supply water. So in the middle of the lake near the dam, there's a big tower used for pumping water that we would swim out to and jump off of. Real dangerous to do that. Shouldn't even swim close to those things, but we didn't know that at the time. We get out to the lake, which is a short drive off a main road, then maybe 3/4 of a mile walk uphill. Find a camp spot, which to our surprise is fully equipped with a big pile of perfect campfire wood. We consider this a score, think no more of it, and proceed to have a killer evening. At this time, we are all 17 to 18 years old and smoked absolutely ludicrous amounts of pot damn near constantly. This occasion was no different. I had even brought along all the fixins for a makeshift heavy-hitting bong, aka a 2-liter soda bottle and a bowl piece of which we were all about 4 rips apiece on. Brains just floating there, no longer attached to bodies, just fucking blazed out moths huddling around this light bulb of a campfire we were so graciously gifted. Surrounded outside of its illuminance by the pitch black night, as if we, in that space of dim-lit woods, were all that existed. That's when I looked up into a patch of distant blackness and saw a tiny little beam appear. I thought maybe my eyes were fucking with me until I squinted and realized it was 2 beams close together, and then realized further that it was headlights, that of an ATV if I had to guess, and that they wheeled around to point in our very direction, then stopped and just sat there. Now they were real damn far away, so we felt safe, but unnerved by the fact that we hadn't even considered law enforcement in style of a game warden or whatever else. But we worked ourselves up into that frenzy soon enough. In what seemed like the eternity, those lights just sat there fucking doing serious damage to our vibe. So when the lights multiplied by into about 5 sets of lights and started snaking their way around through the distant woods and into our direction, panic ensued. In an attempt to cleanse our scene of paraphernalia, I tossed our pipe into the fire. We tried to gather ourselves for whatever kind of interaction we were about to have. There was nowhere to run. The lights came from the direction of our vehicle, and also whoever it was had already seen our firelight from the distance. So we waited. Probably 7 ATVs came through our campsite, right fucking through the middle of it. Each person looking more backwoods, good ol' Appalachian, sideways white trash stump jumping scary as fuck to encounter in the woods at night than the next. And every one of them stared death on to us as they passed by without saying a word. Not so much as a nod or a wave. They went about 50 yards away and stopped. We were glad it wasn't any form of police, so a bit of nerves were eased. I regretted burning the pipe so prematurely and was scolded for it later. Not really. But when we heard them stomping around the woods and shining flashlights, we knew what had gone down. The pile of wood we found ever so perfectly most definitely belonged to this band of late-night folk, and we had snagged it and burned nearly all of it in a wasteful, enormous blaze. We felt bad, so we decided to help them. At this point, I should remind you, we are no less baked out of our gourds than we were previously. We are absolutely fucked, which helps explain our course of action. My friend and I decided that since we barely had any of the wood left, that we should at least give them some of the fire. After all, it is theirs to have, right? Sounded legit enough to my oven-baked ham of a noggin, so two of us grip up a large flaming stick from the campfire and head their direction, one of us not wearing a shirt, neither wearing shoes. When we get close, one moves forward and shines an extremely bright flashlight onto us. If you've ever experienced one of these high-powered spotlight-style LED flashlights, then you know it's absolutely blinding. So there we are, deers in this dude's headlight, blazed, offering flaming sticks to this group of people. I believe my friend spoke, "Do you guys want some of this fire?" To which was responded, "Nah. There's about 10 more people showing up here, so we have to have more wood." So we said, "Oh, all right," and walked away. Back at our camp, we decided that sleeping next to this soon-to-be large gathering of people who would no doubt pass around the tail of the dumbass neighbors who stole the camp spot, and the pre-picked firewood would be impossible and maybe even dangerous. So we packed up and headed back to the vehicle and drove back to a safe house where we proceeded to smoke more and regale in our eventful evening. Story 13. It happened when I was out hunting squirrels and camping with friends in a park in Vermont in early October. All I had was a .22 rifle, as did my two friends. Well, we hiked about 6 miles into, I think it was Camel's Hump State Forest, I can't remember. It gets really dark, really quick in forests, so we set up camp and ate the squirrels we took that day. I could not find for the life of me 2 trees to set my tent up with near my friends and near the campfire, so I set up my tent maybe 500 feet from the camp. We are all tired having hiked and hunted all day and called it a night. Well, here is my first fuck-up or blessing. I did not have a flashlight because my friends ran out of batteries, so I gave them mine. Second fuck-up was how far away I was from the fire. Anyways, I make it to my tent and get into my sleeping bag. It takes a while for me to sleep, so I was up just laying there. All of a sudden, I hear what sounds like trees falling and breaking. Loud cracks from the trees breaking and brush moving about, but it is far off. For the next 20 minutes, it seems about the same farness away. I finally fall asleep, but I wake up from noise. This time it is much closer, but still pretty far out. I just think it is critters, maybe a beaver or fish or cat, even though I heard trees or twigs snapping. However, this time, it keeps getting closer. Then I hear what sounds like a giant man stomping his feet, and I hear it coming right to my tent. It gets extremely loud. I do not even have my .22 rifle on me. It is in my friend's tent. For the next 30 minutes, I hear this thing coming towards me until I swear it was at most 15 yards away from my tent, and at this time I know it must be a moose or bear. I was more worried about it being a moose because it was during rut, and people say they are the most dangerous animal in Vermont. This thing is right next to me in the pitch black, and I can't shine a light on it to see what it is, thankfully, because being young and stupid, I probably would have. It was probably there for 30 minutes, then something spooked it. I guess it was me when it smelled me, or I made a noise. Luckily, it didn't attack my tent. We woke up the next day and saw the largest moose prints I have ever seen right near my tent. I swear since it was during rut, if I coughed or sneezed, it would have attacked me. That was one time I felt I was close to being killed. It is also why I carry a .44 mag with +P+ solid cast buffalo boar with me when I hike during rut in the Northeast now. Story 14. I live in Costa Rica. One weekend, I and a group of friends went to a mountain in Monteverde, a cloud forest. We also decided to hire a guy to guide us to the camping zone. When we were about 2 hours deep in the forest, we start to hear whistling and hisses, but we couldn't find what was producing them. The guide said it was El Dueño del Monte, the mountain's lord, a national legend about a spirit that watches over nature and punishes anyone with bad intentions regarding the forest. His supposedly preferred method to that is causing hikers to get lost. He advised us to ignore the sounds and to keep walking. Then we start hearing a voice calling a name. It wasn't the name of any of us, but in the middle of a forest, well, it is kind creepy. One of my friends replied to the voice saying there wasn't anyone with that name. The guide yelled at him to shut up. We continued walking, but about 1:20 to 30 minutes later, the friend that replied to the voice started acting weird. He looked confused and nervous. Then he sat on the forest floor and told us he was going to sleep. We obviously thought he was joking, but he actually did it. He fell asleep in the middle of the forest. The guide told us it was because of the Lord of the Mountain. We didn't know what to think. Half of the group believed our guide, the other half didn't. Anyway, we couldn't wake up my friend, and we had to go back to the station at the beginning of the forest trail, basically dragging our unconscious friend. On our way back, we heard the voices and the name calling again, but we didn't reply to it. When we finally get out of the forest and we took our friend to the first aid station, he woke up. He told us he didn't remember fell asleep on the forest. At the end, we can't really say if it was something supernatural or not, but it was really creepy.
Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.